All right, good evening. It is Wednesday, January 8th, 2025 at 6 PM, and I'd like to call to order the Kaiser Planning Commission. Happy New Year. New year, same Planning Commission, new topics, some refreshed topics. All the great faces are here. Happy to see everybody. We have one commissioner absent, Commissioner Hostler. Other than that, we got a full house. Let's go ahead and get a motion on the table, please, for the November 2024 minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve and a second as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? None. Okay. Appearance of interested persons. Up on first is Rhonda Rich, followed by Tammy Kunz. Hi, Rhonda. Please state your name and city of residence for the record, and then tell us what you're thinking.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, got it on. Hello, good evening, commissioners and staff. There it is. My name's Rhonda Rich. I'm president of the West Kaiser Neighborhood Association. And I know you don't have a public hearing on this tonight, but it is on the agenda about discussions on the ordinance relating to Planning Commission amending Kaiser Code Sections 2-123 and 2-124. We had a board meeting last Thursday with the West Kaiser Neighborhood Association. And we discussed some of these issues. I want to say, first of all, that we really appreciate all of you serving on this committee. I know it's it's very difficult. You run into some people who are not too happy with the way things have gone with the middle housing, and just to let you know, we kind of stay out of that as a neighborhood association because there's ordinances and they dictate, you know, how the properties are developed. And so it's a little bit painful sometimes to see in West Kaiser, we have a lot of large properties that get divided and people are not happy because they've been there for 30, 40 years. But anyway, just appreciate, we came and testified for that and appreciate Shane's work. He's wonderful. You're lucky to have him. So anyway, we kind of would like to weigh in on a few things, just to kind of give a neighborhood perspective. On section 2-123B, we agree with no more than one voting member shall be engaged in the same kind of occupation, business, trade, or profession. And then the next one is no member shall be a non-resident of the city. And I think there was an or, and we feel strongly that a member should be a resident of Kaiser, not just a property owner who maybe lives out of state or a business owner who lives somewhere else. That really it's important to have people on your commission who are vested and live in Kaiser. So that's our opinion. And then the section C, we thought that 3 years was sufficient. Most committees and boards do have 3-year terms. If you just kind of wanted to go along with what Parks does in traffic safety, we feel that it should be not unlimited, but 3 consecutive terms would be appropriate. So that would give anybody 9 years if you so desired. So that's all I had. We just kind of wanted to share with you as to, like I said, we discussed it as a board. It hasn't been brought to our membership and we're not going to, because you're going to decide tonight on how to go about this, so.
Any questions for Rhonda? Follow. I have one question. So, at some point in the future, 10, 15, 20 years from now, there's an opportunity to expand the urban growth boundary. And that doesn't immediately mean that the city limits change, okay? And in the event that an urban growth boundary were to expand And let's say on one side of Main Avenue, on the west side, it's city limits, so they're city of Kaiser residents.
All right.
But their neighbor exactly across the street is not in the city limits, but the decisions made by this body would impact them in the future upon them becoming part of the actual city. What are your thoughts on that?
Of them being a member on the planning commission. I think we'd have to still hold that, be a resident of the city of Kaiser,
Okay.
not in the transition zone or whatever that area is you're talking about.
So if that
Yeah,
resident.
people can always come and testify and.
Sure. Well, I mean, if that
Yeah.
resident owns a 5-acre piece of property and then now it's all of a sudden in the city limits, they're now subject to all of these big codes that effectively this body could recommend to city council for approval.
Right.
Okay, so that would be that point in time. I mean, obviously during public comment and or during the processes, they'd be able to do it, but okay, that was a good perspective. Thank you. Any other questions for Rhonda?
I tell you, Rob is on our board, but he wasn't at the meeting, so there's no conflict there.
No,
So, okay.
there's no conflict with Rob. He's a great guy.
And I want to let you know too, I do watch these meetings. You might not have a lot of people out in the audience, but I'm glad it's televised. And a lot of people can keep up to date on what's going on in the city. So,
Wow.
thank you.
Well, thanks for watching us. It's good seeing you, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Tammy, come on up, please. And as always, please state your name and city of residence for the record, and then tell us what you're thinking.
All right, Tammy Kunz, there we go. Tammy Kunz, Greater Northeast Kaiser Neighborhood Association President, resident of Kaiser for almost 14 years. And I'm going to second what Rhonda was talking about because that's what we agreed on as a board as well. We did talk about the urban growth boundary, and we are torn on that answer. Some of them want to allow that, some of them are not for that. So we did talk about it, but we haven't come up with a decision. We decided to table it until it comes up before you guys. But we are for the 3-year term limits and consecutive up to 9 years, and keeping it to Kaiser residents. I would prefer that they were residents and just don't have skin in the game because we have lots of people who own houses that live in California and really don't have skin in the game.
Mr. Lindsay, can I ask a question on that? In order to actually be on a border commission, if I recall, you either have to live here and this is your primary residence, or in the case of the one alternative, they can live in Salem, but I don't think that we've ever allowed anybody from like Tennessee to come in and be on a border commission, right?
Historically, I'm not sure how far someone has been away from here. We do have a few of the resolutions that define what committees have as their members, and a couple of them do just say citizen at large, which
Okay.
is random because it's not Kaiser citizen, it's just citizen at large. And, but I think historically, the practice has been to pretty much have Kaiser folks. Maybe if somebody moved away or was like a snowbirder in,
Yeah.
Arizona or something half the time, but came back, or I think there's a lot of ways in which somebody might serve on certain boards. I've seen other jurisdictions where there was like a historical society that had somebody who lived in the area, was actually an expert in that field, and actually moved maybe a few towns over and still wanted to serve out the term, and they let them do that at a different town. So sometimes there's circumstances that people take advantage of the at-large, but for the most part, it's usually in the city.
I've seen it once in my decade plus of volunteer service in Kaiser, so. It's kind of rare, but, and I don't think we want a lot of people coming from Tahiti to be on our planning commission, unless they bring all the sunshine. Okay, sorry, thank you for
Well,
letting me
and
ask that
Zoom
question.
meetings are also sort of discouraged in our city,
Yes,
so,
yes,
I mean, that also, you have to show up.
okay. Any other thoughts or comments, questions for Tammy? All right, well, thank you, Tammy, for engaging that with your neighborhood association group and Rhonda as well. I think that's great. Keep that feedback coming. It's good to hear. Cool. All right, we are going to move on. Let's see, new old business. We're going to talk about, under 4A, discussion ordinance, 3-year term versus 4-year terms and residency requirements. Mr. Witham, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Mr. Chair, Planning Commissioners. Thank you all for being here. It's good to, well, yes, we're all here. There we go. So yeah, I like that it's called New Old Business Staff Report. I mean, I think it was super intuitive on our part to name this section of the agenda always as New Old Business, because you don't get more New Old Business than this one that we talked about back in November. So just as a quick refresher, in November, we were here and y'all talked about rules and the resolutions. We had multiple resolutions that kind of outlined the rules, a couple modifications. So the legal department did a great job of kind of putting those all together to create consistency. That's the next agenda item. I'll stop. So we'll talk more about that on the next agenda item. But there was also the council's ordinance that governed the planning commission rules, which we've heard testimony tonight, or public comment, I guess. It's technically not testimony, but so we took the recommendations that planning commission had made, which primarily dealt with allowances for special meetings, a couple little tweaks, and then the issue on the term limits. And, you know, currently the ordinance says 2 consecutive 3-year terms is the limit. And so planning commission desired to like, hey, that's maybe not long enough. And there's lots of other places that do it more. So the recommendation we took to council at on the 16th at their meeting was to just eliminate that clause altogether with the idea that, hey, people have to reapply every 3 years anyway. Volunteer coordinating committee does that. Council ultimately appoints people to the planning commission. And so when we went to council to discuss it, to bring those proposed changes forward as a recommendation, they had some pause in that area collectively and ultimately directed staff to bring this issue back to planning commission to get some further input from y'all. And Mr. Lindsay and Tammy drafted, we have in the packet. It looks different than last time because the other thing that happened is we codified. And so format of all city ordinances is a little different now. Technically, not 100% in effect, so it's a little bit confusing, but we basically pulled the page and there's some red lines in there for what we're proposing. What was expressed by council was a concern on going to unlimited, and they liked the idea of allowing a 3rd term. And then there was some additional discussion that said, you know, we'd even be okay with 3 terms of 4 years each. And so there was quite a bit of discussion that took place. Ultimately, at the end of it, I don't know if staff recommended it or Mr. Lindsay might have said, well, you know, you have the option of sending it back to planning commission to get their input. And they said, you know, that's a really good idea. The people that serve on the committee, we should probably ask them.
Because for the record, we're here because of you anyways, Mr. City Attorney.
So primarily, you know, part of the red lines in here are no different than what you already recommended, and council didn't have any questions on those. The substantive one that we're back with is regarding this term issue. And so Mr. Lindsay and Tammy prepared some pretty simple language in 2.123 sub B, where the language currently says just that no more than 1 member shall be that's not the right one. C, go to C. It'll either be, right now it says 3 years, right? So it's a 3, or do we want to go to the 4-year term? That's what council wanted to hear. Now, obviously, you guys are making a recommendation to council, so it's still in your power to make a recommendation. As a staff person, immediately when it started getting discussed, in my mind, I was like, I wonder if our current planning commissioners would have signed up if they knew they had to commit to 4 years. Because I would hate for somebody to not sign up if that was too long of a commitment. The flip side is that if you love that idea and you recommend that, as I said, the consensus of the council at the meeting was simply, you know, we think 3 terms is appropriate. It didn't seem like there was a lot of pause between whether the totality of it was 9 or 12 years. again, with the big caveat that whenever the term ends, you still have to reapply and go through the volunteer coordinating committee and get reappointed. So that's one issue for y'all to consider, discuss, and ultimately give us a recommendation to take back to council on. And then the other one that came up, which was one we briefly discussed at Planning Commission, was this residency requirement thing that we've heard about tonight. And we did have some discussion at the November meeting about that a little bit, and you all had some questions about it as well, and ultimately decided, hey, this is a council ordinance. We don't want to monkey with their stuff more than we should. Maybe it's not our place to really get into it. So that kind of just got paused, and there was no real recommendation made on that. Lo and behold, when Shane presented this item at council, they also had pause and concern of, what? That seems odd. And so that would be in 2.123B, the language that was proposed that Mr. Lindsay came up with, which I feel like is pretty in the spirit of what council was referring to, which was, do we want to make this just a straight residency requirement? You got to live here to serve on planning commission. Or should it at least be somebody that has some level of skin in the game, i.e. property owner, business owner, et cetera, et cetera. So those are kind of like two optional language items for planning commission's consideration. And ultimately, council wants to know what planning commission's opinion is on that. I kind of had shared with the council that I said, this did come up at planning commission, had some discussion about it. There was some question marks around it, but they really didn't feel it was necessarily appropriate for them to make recommendations in an area that isn't necessarily something they're going to be adopting. But I'm sure they'd be happy to weigh in. So sorry, I committed you to that. So those are kind of the two substance kind of issues that we're looking at. The other little changes that we made for the consensus piece, being the chair and the council liaison and staff liaison, everybody thought that was a good idea, made sense. The holding special meetings if we need to, obviously that was kind of a need to, so that was like crickets. Nobody even questioned that one at all. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any more questions, but it is familiar, and ultimately it is you all's, as a planning commission's, ability to make a recommendation as you deem appropriate, that we will take back to council and that they can choose to adopt or ultimately change if they wanted to as well.
Okay, commissioners, thoughts, comments? I think let's how about we start with the non-resident one first, and then we'll just kind of work our way down. So let's look at 2.123 sub B. Thoughts, comments on the no member shall be a non-resident of the city, or no member should be a non-resident of the city unless they're a property owner, employee, or business owner in the city. Yeah, Commissioner Witters.
Thank you. I actually wasn't here for the November, so this is my first time weighing in on this. But I do like the fact that we're inviting a property or a business owner, employer, or what have you onto the commission, because right now, if it's only residents who live in Kaiser, that's one point of view. Having someone from a business, owns a business, participates in business or whatever, there's topics that we deal with here that affect businesses maybe more directly than just residences. And so having somebody on the commission who can weigh in from that perspective, I think that would be valuable and beneficial for the commission.
Okay. Commissioner Hutchins.
I'd agree with that as well. And I like that kind of keeps our options open too. If somebody really phenomenal shows up and, wants to be a part of this, or maybe they grew up here and, can't afford to buy a house here for a little while, or, whatever the circumstances is, it lets somebody be involved. And we still have the volunteer committee. So if somebody shows up and we're like, why are you on here? You have no interest, like they can kind of check that for us.
Commissioner King.
I like the idea of having the property owner or business owner. I don't necessarily think employee. If that's, is it employee as a business owner or, because I wasn't here in November either, so I just want to get clarification on that.
This is new.
Yeah, this is some brand-new language,
Okay.
and it is an attempt to put into language kind of some of the questions that council had on what the appropriate threshold is. So ultimately, this is all just draft language, and we can take what planning commission says, you know, like I said, there's a very simple, like, hey, if you're hard on like just only resident, that first sentence is the one you would do, and we would strike the rest. If it's, we want somebody that has skin in the game, what's the appropriate level of skin in the game, so to speak? I think that is definitely what council wants to hear from planning commission. So if it's, hey, we like the idea of a property owner or a business owner, and that's the right threshold, then we could eliminate that employee. That would just be, you all would need to make ultimately a motion at some point on what the recommendation is. So there's no magic about it, because council didn't say, we want this exactly. It was more of a question mark on it. We're not sure we want the just simple, hey, one person can be anybody kind of thing. So does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I like the idea of property owner and business owner, maybe not necessarily employee, because you can live, in Portland and still be an employee of the city of Kaiser or within city limits. So I like those two, other than, and I guess the UGB thing that you brought up, Commissioner Laurie, is interesting as well, because it really does have an effect on those people. The decisions and recommendations that we make have an impact on those people within that UGB. And so if they're excluded from that opportunity to serve on, this commission, when it could directly affect them, whether it's, something to do with the neighboring 5-acre parcel that's now going to be a park or a subdivision or a school or something like that. So I like both ideas of either just not being a non-resident or the property owner and business. Those are kind of just my thoughts.
Mr. Lindsay.
I was just going to supplement what Shane said and say that one of the words that came up numerous times at the council meeting was, what type of nexus would you have? You have to have some sort of nexus to Kaiser, but they wanted your opinion on what that nexus would be. I would say, though, we share a UGB with Salem, so that could get awkward. That could go pretty far south.
Yeah,
Unless we just actually make a straight line instead of doing this wobbly crap back and forth.
yeah, I think if planning commission was considering something like that, I think we would want to wordsmith that language to be specific to the Kaiser portion of the urban growth boundary.
Yeah.
Which is how it is now. I mean, it is defined in the comprehensive plans on, yes, we're a shared UGB, but Kaiser's fully in charge of their section and Salem's their section. So yeah, I think we would have, obviously that wasn't necessarily anticipated by anything that was discussed briefly at council or necessarily by Joe and I. But so yeah, if that's a route you go, I do think we want to make sure that, I would want to hear from you that you would want to drill down onto like, what would that be? Because it might be odd to have somebody in a UGB out off of, Corden or something on our planning commission, but it might be awesome.
Commissioner Grants.
My opinion, I certainly don't think being an employee of a business within Kaiser is enough skin in the game. And I'm kind of on the fence about the property owner or business owner. I mean, that's a pretty wide open door that anybody could fit in. I don't know. I'm hesitant on that.
Commissioner Lopez.
Yeah, I think I share a lot of your guys' points. I believe, the whole point of being here is having this diversity that we do have up here. So having the one makes sense. You just brought that up. Now I'm thinking about that. But being a property owner here or having a business here puts skin in the game, and it brings you that perspective from that other person that we wouldn't have. So I think I'm leaning towards that. The employee makes sense. You're here, just pick something different, get up and go, and you're gone. But if all the other ones have something to lose or something more building here. So I think we should, should have a say on what happens here. That's where I'm at. But I like the idea of having one that's, I don't want to say different, but, just I think the scope is going to be different regardless. So, yeah, so I'm there, unless a member is a property owner or business owner. And I was thinking with the employees, just something silly, but I was thinking, you spend more time at work than you do at home usually, so that's kind of like what I was trying to justify being an employee, but I can't see that part of it.
So I think when I brought up the urban growth boundary piece, it was illustrative in nature, but there's also some context to it because there's an individual that is often commenting on some of the social media stuff related to anything basically in the Meadows North, right? It's one of those things that I'm sensitive to the opportunity for an urban growth boundary expansion. And again, it's generally not immediate that it comes into city limits. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that's because there's the extension of services that may not be available given a certain distance and time away from where existing services are or overall infrastructure capacity. That's kind of why we have that UT zone, correct? And the UT zone is the urban transition zone. That's factually correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, but what can occur is zoning within that urban growth boundary that they would be party to under the land use process, right? Or am I getting off base?
No, I think you're right, what you're saying, if I'm tracking.
Okay, so, I think that they get very limited opportunity to have a say in what would occur at their property or any of the adjacent properties around them, right?
So, okay, so I'll try to explain. I might ask Ms. King to weigh in.
Oh, she's chomping at the bit. She's like, I got this.
She used to be a planner for Marion County, and there's a pretty
Yeah, I know.
significant area that's within a UGB, but that's also Marion County.
Correct.
So, generally speaking, from a high level, if you were to expand the UGB, you would comp plan for the properties, right? And the comp plan is going to align with underlying zoning designations, but generally as properties actually annexed into the city, then that's when your actual zoning gets applied and the people are doing comp plan zone changes or whatever it would be, right? So that's when they're going to actually divide property and things like that. And then there's also kind of like the process because of how you annex, and there's some rules around that. But I would love to hear Commissioner King's perspective, since she was a planner in Marion County, where there's a pretty significant portion that we all who have grown up here and go places, you just kind of think of it as Salem, and it's not Salem. Like a big portion of Lancaster and stuff is like Marion County, but it's clearly within the UGB, it's urban, so there are things that get applied. But, so would you like to maybe weigh in and?
Sure,
Okay.
I'd love to. So with the UT zone, and then I guess the more urban you get, it turns into a UD zone, which is urban development. You have, the property owner of whether it's UT or UD has a designation, an underlying comprehensive designation of what their property will eventually be once it's annexed into the city, whether it's Kaiser or Salem. Now, the property owner, they may have owned the property for 1,000 years, and it's always been, they've always used it for some sort of commercial use, but then when they go to annex into the city's like, just kidding, it's only residential. And we're not going, you need to get services, but we're not gonna give you services for these reasons, X, Y, and Z. So, having that transition zone kind of puts that property owner into a weird situation where they're paying attention to what the county's doing because they're technically governed by the county. But then really ultimately what they, if they want to redevelop into something and they need services from the city, they need to annex in at the city's designation of the comprehensive plan and then match that zoning. So it can kind of just be this weird, I don't know I don't know what to do, what's happening, who to follow, so it's,
It's super simple. There's no complexity to it.
extremely simple. But yeah, so if, you have people within the UT zones or UD zones that may want to, that want to be a part of a commission or, a governing body, then it just depends on what they're looking for. And I would just recommend that they come and, to the public hearings, to all of them, to anything that would affect, their zoning or their property, because that's really where they're gonna get the best idea, and I honestly don't know if I answered anybody's question. I just rambled.
I think it's
You got
helpful.
Commissioner Grant's attention because he was like, I got to talk about this.
Right, so we've been talking about the possibility of having somebody on the commission that's inside the urban growth boundary, so they can have a say in what happens to their property.
Which they would, yeah,
But they would have to recuse themselves
that's right.
because of a conflict. So then what's the point?
No, I mean, they could comment on every other piece of the zoning that wasn't their specific piece of the zoning. Right? So like if maybe they
Okay,
were
but
that
if it's-
one leftover piece that was gonna be acreage residential, which, yeah, right. But everything else was, they could comment on everything that, am I right in that? I mean, they could recuse themselves from a portion of the conversation?
I'm
Or
gonna
would it be-
give you a really annoying answer. It's the "it depends" answer that
Well,
lawyers like to
right.
give. No, if it were one vote for the whole area, say, it was
Yeah.
kind of a special, a DCP, I guess, right? Like a development concept plan or something.
Right.
And it affected them, I would say you have to recuse yourself because you can't parse that out. But if it were, the neighborhoods near them and there wasn't actual conflict, then they could participate.
But, I mean, your point's completely valid.
I think it would be very hard to not have a perception of conflict,
Sure.
at the very least.
But again, okay, fine. They can still speak on behalf of their neighbors, right? Or they can be a representative of that. And again, I'm not saying that this is all the right answer. I'm just saying it opens up an opportunity for the future of potential areas that could be impacted. And what I'm thinking about this is like, maybe the state takes the reins off a little bit and finally starts to let the cities have a little bit of control over their own destiny. I'm also going to grow a mohawk. But, in a situation where you've got your nice 10, 15,000 square foot lot that you've lived there for 20, 30 years, that's just on the other side of the existing urban growth boundary, and it is destined to now be zoned residential, and the next door neighbor to you, they've been trying to sell it, but they can't because it's too small to do farming, it's too small to do ag industrial, but now they can plunk down 75 units of apartments. My guess is you'd probably want to be able to have a conversation about that and be a representative for your community, right? And again, you're still conflicted out, you still wouldn't be able to vote on it, but
I mean, I guess it's easier if you say, right now, people have neighbors, right?
yeah.
And so you wouldn't be conflicted out necessarily if it was your neighbor that came in and wanted a change. Or if we started looking at, the downtown corridor and you happen to be a couple streets over.
Right.
You see what I mean? So there is proximity and stuff like that. In the matter of, you could only then speak as if you were really gonna be impacted, you have to step down from the dais and not
You have to speak as
participate in
party.
in the actual deliberations, but you could as then a separate citizen, which you would have the right to
Correct.
speak, so. Yeah.
So, clarification, so if you're sitting, voting member on the commission and there's a public hearing that's happening before the body here and you have a conflict and you have to recuse yourself, can you then
If you,
comment?
if you have a conflict, you're not supposed to use your position even to be part of the debate or deliberation. But there's still this notion, right, that if you said, I'm going to recuse myself, I'm not even going to sit up here. But I wanted to put in a statement in the record.
I thought somewhere in the rules that were before us in November, there was something that said that if you recuse yourself because of a conflict, you can't
Leave the room.
participate in the hearing at all.
Well, you can't participate in the hearing.
From the
but you
decision-making
could-
body.
You could have like a written as Joe Schmo. You know what I mean? I wouldn't
Isn't that
suggest
still
it.
participating?
What?
Isn't that still participating?
But it says the decision-making body though, right? So for example, if I have a conditional use permit and Commissioner Grants is mad because I'm gonna put up this 25-foot water slide and he doesn't want us to get the water on his property,
love it.
he could comment as a interested party. Now, he couldn't act on it, but he could come in and say, you know what, I've talked to, you
Or
know,
be part of the conversation. You see what I mean?
of the decision-making
But-
body.
Which is, if, by the way, though, if that were the situation, I would still discourage that. I would say, have your wife do it. Have your, loved ones do it. You see what I'm saying? Well, okay, but you know what I mean.
Okay, so, okay, the UGB thing, I think we all kind of get that. Now, property owner. Can we put sideboards on that?
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that we need somebody coming from, oh, what's another good country to pick on? Canada. Saying, hey, I own a bunch of property in Kaiser and I'm gonna be on the planning commission. Like, is there, because the property owner thing for me is super, it's almost too loose. I don't like that. I don't want, as a person that lives in Kaiser and loves my community, I don't want out-of-state investors coming in and try to influence the way we do business. I feel like that's wrong, because in the day of, the days of the Brady Bunch screen and everybody working wherever they want, they could be, in another state on property and say, well, da-da-da-da, right? And,
You could just add in that they have to be an Oregon resident.
well, but even
I mean-
that, I think there's complications with that. For me
Yeah.
personally, there's complications. I would say, property owner and reside in Marion County, right?
Yeah.
So for example, like if Counselor Duran, decided they're gonna go, build their house up in Jervis or something, but they own their business still in Kaiser, that would be you'd have a duality of rational nexus.
Sure, yeah.
As a property
I
owner.
think Counselor Duran would have to quit being a counselor though, because I'm pretty sure they have a real strong residency requirement for a city council. No, I'm teasing. But no, I think, honestly, to speak to your point is, can you put sideboards on it and what are those sideboards? I think that's exactly what city council wants to kind of hear from planning commission is, from your perspective, being on the dais, being participants in the process, what is that, as Joe said, what is that appropriate level, if you will, or, what is the appropriate nexus and what is that recommendation to them? I'm guessing they will be discussing it as well. But yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. You can tweak or change and give us direction on what we want to take back as the recommendation at the end of the day.
Yes.
Isn't that where we have to trust the volunteer committee, though? If somebody shows up and says, hey, I want to
I
commute
was just
in.
so I actually have practical experience in this. When back in like 2017, 2016, we were desperately trying to find volunteers, okay? Debbie was calling me on a regular basis, you gotta find people, you gotta find people. One of my good friends, Ben Hiddle, came in and says, man, I really wanna do this. And I said, well, you live in Salem. He's like, oh, right. Well, there's a provision that allowed him to do it. He grew up in Kaiser. He coaches in Kaiser. He spent, at the time, the bulk of his time in Kaiser, in the parks, coaching, doing that stuff. Initially, we had enough volunteers from the city of Kaiser that could have applied for those positions and did apply for those positions. And Ben was on the out. Well, turned out that 2 of them didn't show up and the volunteer coordinating committee thought, you know what, you're a Kaiser kid, you just happen to live in Salem, we're gonna let you on. And he did, and he came on for about a year and a half, and then he went on about his business. But that is an absolute valid point, that all things being considered, the majority of the time, unless there's like some big compelling thing, they're like, man, this is the greatest person since, I don't know, Governor McCall, when it comes to land use, we really want him on here. 99.9% of the time, they're gonna pick a Kaiser person. It is the rare exception. The only other person that I'm aware of right now is on the Parks Board, and he's about as Kaiser as it gets, and he just happens to live right outside Kaiser. So, I think in all of this, ultimately, we've got two very experienced and very qualified bodies of volunteers, both with the Volunteer Coordinating Council and the City Council, that could say, gosh, thank you for being here. However, this is where we need to go. So, I do, though, very, 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 very strongly believe that if it's a property owner, they have to reside in Marion County. I am not comfortable with doing anything outside of that.
What I'm trying to do is sort of, if you guys are seemingly coming to a consensus, we want to take that note back
Again,
to them.
yeah.
So I'm writing down a Kaiser property owner who is at least a resident of Marion County as one of, and does that sound like generalized consensus
That was
on
just
that?
my
'Cause some people-
recommendation. I brought that
Oh,
up in the sideboard, but I don't think anybody else had any feelings on that. Commissioner Witters?
Thank you. Just to play devil's advocate here, just because somebody doesn't live in Marion County, if they own property or a business within Kaiser, that doesn't mean that they're not vested in, a positive growth and a positive outcome as to what happens here. I think the sideboard you're talking about is the fact that it's limited to one member. You can only have one member who's a non-resident of Kaiser, and I think that would be the sideboard. The other one would be that I believe there's a limit to how many meetings you can miss and still be on
Yeah, it's not really
on the
ever been
commission.
enforced, though.
So, well, I mean, but if you have somebody who's an absentee and they, just call in or whatever, I mean, I think that would be your avenue to try and correct this issue. But I do believe that, if and obviously, your example of, some land baron that is trying to, hopefully that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But the idea that just because they don't live in the area doesn't mean that they want to have, a positive outcome, whatever it may be, whether we're talking livability, economic, what have you, I mean, I don't see that in itself being a disqualifying instance when they do actually own property within the city and are vested in that manner. Again, that's just my opinion.
If you were gonna do a requirement, I'd rather see a mileage than a county, because like you can literally throw a
Yeah.
rock in West Kaiser and be in another county.
Gotta throw it really
I mean,
far.
if you had a really good arm.
Gotta throw it really far. Well, but the mileage then puts you into Polk County. By
Well,
that
that's what I'm
logic,
saying,
yeah.
like, so is there really any difference with someone who lives, let's say, in the other end of Silverton and somebody who lives in, West Salem?
Yeah. I live in Polk County. Commissioner Grants.
Follow-up question on sideboards here. You can be a property owner and have that in an LLC or corporate entity. Would you want to limit that to individual ownership?
Ooh, that's a good point.
Don't ask good questions.
Sorry.
Loophole finder.
Well, I mean, an LLC can't be a volunteer, right?
No, the LLC.
Yeah,
That'll come
or they might be considered a business owner in the city at that point.
Say again?
Well, the other piece was the business owner in the city,
Yeah.
if that was the nexus that you guys so chose to recognize.
Shane's having a lot of fun with this one. I don't know, Counselor. You were at the meeting. Tell us what y'all's thoughts were.
This one, we didn't have a whole lot of discussion on. I mean, we did, but I don't think there was a whole lot of consensus on this one, so.
I think that's why it's back here.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it was truly a catch Shane off guard with questions about things
This
that we
feels like
didn't
a
really
Lucy
talk
football
about at Planning Commission. And Shane going, yeah, we kind of briefly discussed it and we really didn't take it up. But if you want us to take it up, we can do that now.
This
So
feels-
we didn't get a ton of guidance other than they wanted to really know what Planning Commission thought was the appropriate connection point, so.
It does feel a little loose in the football, but, I don't know, where are we at? Test the waters, Counselor.
so, I mean, it almost feels like we're trying to fix something that isn't broke, so do we even need to make a change?
Because it's currently, you can be a non-resident and do it, right?
And it hasn't been an issue.
No. But if I understood Mr. Lindsay correctly, the council appeared to be looking for a rational nexus. Is that an accurate representation of what you said? So it does feel to me like if we just go back with, meh, we're just kidding, you guys get it back. We're gonna be volleying this thing back and forth, I feel like.
Well, I think if I can, I think that if, again, I'm not a planning commissioner. I'm just the staff liaison. I'm here to help. But I think if planning commission says, okay, you know what, our recommendation is to leave it as is, we don't have concerns necessarily about the residency requirement, then that would definitely put the ball back in council's court to say, well, we're in charge of all of these ordinances and maybe they still have an issue with it. The flip side is planning commission says, hey, we really feel strongly that it should be a residency requirement. I think that's really what they want to know. So, I mean, I leaned over to Mr. Lindsay earlier and I was like, I'm not sure if we're going to get straight line consensus on this one. There's a lot of different thoughts. So I don't know if it's, it may be helpful if somebody wants to kind of make a motion on what they feel is an appropriate way, and you could put a motion on the table and then deliberate over it and see where you guys land. I don't know if that would be helpful.
Well, my goal was to consolidate this into one motion, so get a
Gotcha.
consensus, consolidate, then do one motion. But if we're not gonna get there, then we need to,
Well, yeah, I guess how hard do you want to work to come up with if we were king for a day, how would we have it? You know what I mean?
Well,
Which is sometimes an interesting exercise, but sometimes a very hard one.
for me, it's 6 and 1, half a dozen the other, right? Because
Yeah.
I do see the merit of just really keeping this all Kaiser. However, I also understand and totally respect the idea of a business owner, because they do have a stake. Property owners do have a stake. Although, there's that concern about, what'd you call it, property barons? Or somebody used the word property barons, very good term. It has me concerned, because, they could be like, hey, we're gonna swoop in here, be on the planning commission, because we just bought, the 7-Eleven on River Road, and now we're gonna turn that into a 20-story high-rise, right? It's not practical, and they'd have to conflict out anyways. In fact, my argument would be, as a property owner, their best bet would be to comment on the record as a party for the particular issue and petition that way. Anyways, what do you got?
I'm leaning towards, if we're gonna expand or keep the non-resident portion, employees out, I think business owner should be out, and it should be property owner, individual ownership.
Okay.
That's just where I'm at.
I'm gonna push back a little bit on the business owner, only because we do have a lot of business owners that are just like right on the other side of the city limits. And there's a lot of businesses, that I can think of that invest a tremendous amount of time and effort into our city. And they do have a vested interest in our city. They're, and again, that's where it gets slippery, because they could live in LeGrand and then drive over every day on their motorcycle to do work, but it's unlikely.
One thing I might offer, I think, just as I'm kind of going back in my brain about council and generally the the inference that I was picking up on based on what they're wanting to hear. I think there are some details that you'd want to work out, no matter which way you go, as far as, okay, business owners, and does that mean a physical business? Does that mean a business that's registered here? Does that mean a home-based business? I mean, you can start pulling on the thread, right? I think the bigger piece, and I may be speaking out of turn, so Counselor Duran, feel free to jump in and say, no, Shane is wrong. But I really think what council is looking for, as much as anything, is a recommendation from the planning commission that with the sitting planning commission, with the experience that y'all have and the service that you're performing, is where your opinion lies on who are the people that are best to serve on this commission with the greater view of the city of Kaiser in their mind as we lead our community forward in the next 20, 30 years. And so I think, we can get bogged down in a lot of the details, but I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I think that's where it can sometimes we can get a little bit heavy-handed on, only this or only that, but I don't know if that helps with framing up in your own brains on whether or not it's a business owner, it's a this or a that. But I think if you're like, hey, we feel like this is the level of engagement in the community they should be having, maybe Mr. Lindsay can magically come up with some language that could help us in that. Just a thought.
I mean, he threw you on the spot bringing this to begin with. Turnabout's fair play.
I guess what I would suggest too is if people don't feel strongly or there isn't a consensus to just say non-residents, then that's your flow chart to then even work on if everybody has to be a resident, and 4 of y'all feel that way, you're kind of done.
Yeah.
So that might be your first question to answer, but then, I guess if you want to try an individual property owner or a business owner that has to live within a 25-mile radius, or, those are ideas. But maybe,
All right,
maybe not getting it into
let's get to
one.
the issue of the non-residency thing first. Is anybody completely says, nope, they have to be a resident of Kaiser? Commissioner Lopez?
No.
Commissioner Witters?
No.
Commissioner Grants?
No?
Okay, that's 3. Commissioner Hutchins? No. Commissioner King?
No.
Great. What about, so it sounds like planning commission's okay with recommending a non-resident. Now, in terms of, individual property owner or property owner, do you have a preference, property owner, individual property owner?
No, I don't.
Okay, what, is there a difference in that?
I would assume, was it,
Property owner,
yeah,
individual?
Commissioner Grants brought it up, right?
Yeah.
So not to take or put words in your mouth, what did you think?
No, I felt like it should be in an individual's name, not an LLC or corporate structure.
Okay.
And so maybe that's a stronger nexus, I guess, is the way to put that.
A property owner with a real human's name.
Yeah.
Individual property owner. No preference for you?
No, and just to say it because I have it written down, on the sideboards thing, I was thinking, right, about those things, and where I'm at was thinking, unless a member is a property owner or business owner, so we skipped employee, removed it. And then I was thinking for sideboards, we have somebody that's not vested, are they gonna travel over here every, to our meetings? They might, okay, cool, that's one thing, right? Volunteer committee, like we talked about, so that's another, I'll say hurdle. We don't, it's not a wall, we wanted to make sure that, and then the committee, and then the council to approve them, so we have those kind of things in play. And then the last one I see here is a vote, right? So like if I come on here and tell you guys, hey, we're gonna do this, you guys say, no, we're not gonna do it, right? So I think like that's like another, maybe point that I just wanted to make sure I was in the understanding of, because it does seem like we have a few things in place to help with maybe putting the wrong person or somebody that's not totally vested in Kaiser.
Sure.
But-
Well, again, by the time it ges to us, they've been through 2
Right.
vesting, vestments?
Vetting.
Vetting, ha, there's a word.
Yeah, so-
Vetting processes.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I put that out there, that I was thinking and make sure I was in the right before obviously we make decisions bigger here, but, yeah, the business owner, like you said, maybe in a personal name or a different name, to me, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, we're just trying to protect, when someone starts a business with an LLC, all you're looking is for protection, nothing really else, whether it's in your name or you're the only person, right? So that's why for me, it wouldn't really matter.
Sole practitioners only.
Yeah,
Commissioner
no
Williams.
props.
I don't have a preference between sole owner or a vested
For
interest.
properties, okay. And you mentioned the individual owner,
Yeah.
okay? Commissioner Hatches,
I'm on the same page as Commissioner Lopez.
what page is that?
Exactly what he said. Like, that's literally what I've been thinking.
I should have been paying better attention. Say it again. Can you reiterate, because I heard portions of it, but I was also looking.
The
at
way he was going through the vetting process, I think we're getting a little bit too in the weeds to some extent because we have so many checks and balances. And even if we do get someone on here who's just, let's say some like raving lunatic makes it on, it's still one vote.
That's fair. Okay, Commissioner King?
I don't care if it's individual or entity or, I mean, I own a business that's an LLC that's not in my name. And I also live and work in Kaiser, so it's, but, you look at all the other small businesses, you have a lot of small businesses here, which is great. A lot of them are not gonna be, I'm Lindsay King, business,
Yeah,
coffee
yeah.
business,
Yeah, yeah.
or whatever it might be. So I think either way, it's fine with me.
I ask one question. Sounds like, for the most part, folks are good with the property owner, business owner. Employee sounds like it's out. Can we put a caveat, preference shall be given to Kaiser residents?
Well, there's a couple of different things, and I guess you don't want to open it up too much, but they really weren't limiting it to just this either. This was just my stab at putting in some categories that I knew they mentioned. So, I mean, you could say no more than one member can be a non-resident, full stop.
Okay,
And that non-resident still has to have this nexus. Or you could say 2 members, as long as you see what I'm saying? So I guess if you really felt strongly about that suggestion, right now you're right, it's stronger to say, they have a nexus and they're only one vote. Does that answer the question? Is that what you were getting
yeah,
at?
I mean,
Yeah.
I just didn't know if we, like, all things being equal, I mean, you have 2 identical applications, you got one person that lives in,
Yeah, yeah.
Brooks, and the
Oh.
other person actually lives in Kaiser.
Yeah.
Preference would be for the Kaiser person.
So
it's
you
a
don't,
tiebreaker.
I guess, if I'm reading that or hearing it this way, yeah, I don't think you would have to say, that non-resident position must always be a non-resident.
Correct.
But what if the resident came out in the vetting process, if the interview and all that was really wonky? Would you want to give preference to
No,
them just because?
I don't think anybody here says we have to have a non-resident person on the board.
Yeah, yeah. But did you get what I'm saying there is, if you say Kaiser resident always gets preference, then
Well-
what does that mean when the 2 people interview and one person can barely speak and the other person is like a star and they happen to be the non-resident
Okay,
and there's
that's fair.
a non-resident
That's fair,
available?
that's fair. Okay, so I think the consensus is, 1 non-resident must be a property owner or business owner in Kaiser.
As written, strike employee.
Strike employee. Okay, all right, now, let's get to terms. Our recommendation was eliminate term limits. That's consistent with most, if not all jurisdictions within Marion County, including Marion County. Council has come back and said they're okay with 3 3-year terms, which is 9 years, or 3 4-year terms, which is 12 years. I don't do math in public, but my question might be, Councilor Duran, if I may put you on the spot. If the council's okay with, let me do math. 3 4-year terms, would the council be okay with 4 3-year terms? All totaling 12 years.
I would be.
Okay? I'm just asking that question. Now, let's start down here. Commissioner King, you weren't even here, so this is all brand new to you.
Yes, I did watch,
Okay?
though, the YouTube.
What are your
So,
thoughts?
I'm fine with the 3 or 4 years. I mean, like Shane said, you have to reapply to be, and go through that process. So it's not like you're committing yourself to 9 or 12 years and, in year 8, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm stuck. So I think it's, either way is fine. I think the longer you have somebody on, the commission, the more institutional knowledge, the more, the greater ability to just have the memories of, oh, these conversations we had, 2 years ago or 5 years ago, remember this kind of thing. I really appreciated it because there are commissions and councils where everybody's brand new and it's like, what's going on? I don't know.
Right.
But we had to term out, or on the flip side, you have people that have been there for 9, 10 years and it's like, oh, thank gosh, they have so much knowledge. I remember this one very specific thing that we talked about in, 2016, August, and they're like, yep, I know that. And so it's a huge benefit. So, so I think it's a huge benefit to at least give, the commission members that option of the longevity, whether it's 9 or 12 years, but I'm fine with either one.
Commissioner Hatches?
I like what you just suggested, that 3 years is nice because it keeps it consistent with the other boards and makes it a little bit less confusing. But 4 3-year terms makes sense.
Okay.
And the math works.
Commissioner Grant?
I mean, I agree with Shane. 4 years seems like a long time, but here I am working on year 6. Yeah, I agree. I don't think I have a preference over 3 4s or 4 3s.
Commissioner Waters?
I like the 4 3-year terms. It gives a little bit of flexibility. It does give, like we heard, that history amongst, the members. They will be able to refer back to prior instances or discussions, but it also gives an opportunity every so often to get some new perspectives and new blood onto the board. So I think it's kind of best of both worlds going that route.
Commissioner Lopez?
I thought you were gonna get to me.
What's that?
I thought you were gonna get to me. You turned around. I'm like, oh, all right.
No,
That's why you started on that side.
No, I wasn't. I would never do that to you. No, I was looking back down because I'm like, okay, what's next?
No, I agree with the 4 3s. It makes sense, for consistency with everybody, and then even for now, right? Some of you guys are terming out, so even just adding that third instead of trying to do math and figure out, okay, well, instead of 3, we get a 4, we get a whatever it might be. It just kind of keeps it going. So, and life's changed, I mean, we all try our best up here, and there's 7 different things going on. So I think the 3 years makes sense, for flexibility and everything else in between. So instead of being tied down to that 4.
Yeah. Well, I think 4 actually generally would screw everything up with all the terms right now.
Right. So I'm good with
As
that.
long as you only did it moving forward,
Yeah.
then it wouldn't, because then it's longer than 3. So you'd have a 4-year, and then the next person to expire would be still a 3-year. So they would expire in,
And the 4, the 3, or the 1.
yeah. But I hear what you say, because you don't want to have to unpack like,
Well, and there's
do we
also
give
the
ourselves
strange,
4 years now, then?
there's also the strange nuance if a commissioner leaves after the first year and somebody comes in,
Yeah.
that actually doesn't count against their term limit.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't?
No.
Has to be like full terms.
Yeah, it doesn't change the rotation, because if it did, I would have been gone last year. Because I came in a partial term and I filled a 2-year term, and then I'm on my second, 3rd year right now. It's been a very long, almost 8 years. I mean, to your point, Commissioner King, I mean, Councilor Duran and I routinely, and even Commissioner Grants routinely go back and talk about some of the stuff that's like, We were doing this in 2017, 2016, right? I mean, so it is important. Please.
That is one thing I was talking about too. You know, obviously, I think none of us were looking for unlimited up here. I think that there needs to be terms, but I do find it refreshing to be able to lean on, you know, you guys and what you guys have been through. And I want to make a difference as a Kaiser resident. So I want to make sure I have the time. So
Yeah.
we invest time up here, you know, all of us invest the time up here because we want a better Kaiser. So if, a little selfishly, you know, it would seem kind of sad to term out so soon before anything that you put all the work into, you didn't get to see it because things take so long, right? And that's maybe a little selfish, but, you know, like I said, we want to do our part, but at the same time, it'd be nice to, you know, I joke around all the time when someone goes long, I say, I don't want the pregnancy, I just want the baby. On this instance, it would be the opposite, right? I mean, it's one of those, we see everything and then we don't. So, I do appreciate having the knowledge that you guys have and being able to just listen to you guys go back and forth on things that have already been said instead of, okay, well, let's start from the beginning again, and then somebody else in the beginning again. So I do see the importance of that, of having both new and tiered persons here, so tenured.
It is tough. I mean, some of these processes take a very long time. We're looking at TSP at some point, the Transportation System Plan. We're looking at a bunch of other stuff, and those studies can take 18 months, depending, right? And so that consistency and that look back and that, okay, how did we get here? Why are we here? I expect at some point we'll be looking at another housing needs analysis probably in the next 24 to 36 months. I don't think we ever codified our HNA, right? And so there's some population projection issues that most of you, I think Commissioner King's probably the only one, other than maybe Commissioner Granson and Councilor Duran, that know that there were population projection things that were just totally wonky 3 years ago. People went, what are you doing, right? It was a very underwhelming projection by PSU. You know, I think that in the initial thought process, we talked about this, and we heard from Councilor Anderson, former Councilor Anderson, and I talked with Councilor Duran, and I talked with a bunch of the colleagues that we had over time. They would have loved to have done more time because it, you know, it does take a couple years to get your feet underneath you, and by the time that happens, you're up for another term, and it is tough, and this is hard, complex things, especially what we've been dealing with in the last, 5-6 years, right? So I'm sympathetic to the desire to have longevity. I'm not going to die on this hill. I'm invested in our community. I think that playing a little bit of devil's advocate, if we go back to the council and say, you know what, we really like the 4 3-year term option, it keeps it consistent with the rest of the terms, periods for the rest of the boards and councils. You all open the door for the 12 years through the 3 4-year things, so we're just going to kind of do a little math on paper and say, is this good enough as well? Any objections to that idea? So put forward the recommendation to change to 4 3-year terms. Any nays? No, okay. Great. Now, any other comments on these other 2 items, the consensus by chair, council liaison, and staff liaison to council the meeting? Anybody else hate that idea? No. Nope? Great. Commission may hold special meetings as needed in staff's determination for land use applications. We did that to ourselves with the variances and everything else. Our answer ought to be yes.
It was the last time we talked about those ones.
You what?
It was the last time we talked about it, so don't change your mind now.
I'm just making sure. And then, so that's it, yeah?
Yes, Chair Lawyer, could I,
No. Carry on. Yes, please.
so, you know, obviously, Planning Commission makes a recommendation. I think we've got all we need to know where that recommendation lies and the reasons for doing it. Thank you for discussing it. Like, it was super helpful to hear where you guys are at. The one thing I would like just for me to know, since I'll be giving a staff report at a future council meeting, if that discussion about the terms were to go back and forth, I clearly hear, hey, 12 years is 12 years. The 3 years makes sense for the staggering. There's a lot of things that, yeah, that totally makes sense. I wasn't sure that I got real consensus as you all talked about your experiences on how you felt of the 4 versus the 3. Reason being, if I'm asked a question and it ends up with 3 3-year terms instead of 3 4-year terms, I kind of would like to know from the Planning Commission's perspective, is that something like from your all's perspective, when you sign up for Planning Commission, if it would have been a 4-year term, would you just been like, absolutely, I'm not even gonna make an application on that? Because I know the desire for term limits and volunteers is to have quality volunteers and to get people to participate in our meetings and to engage. And I would hate to have something put forth that would be a barrier to engagement if it landed on a 4-year, 3 4-year terms or something, and immediately I have Planning Commission goes, not what I signed up for, I'm out. So that's something that I was just kind of curious, because I don't know that I really heard too much on where you guys were at on that. If you don't have real strong opinions, that's fine. Obviously, we're going to be taking this recommendation. It makes a lot of sense to me. It's the same number of years at the end of the day. So maybe a moot point, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, am I going to get a question that I'm not going to know an answer to because I didn't ask you all? So that's what I'm trying to prevent from happening.
Yes.
What I did hear, one of the answers, or maybe 2 of the answers, it spoke to this, but it was so fast because it was the word flexibility. It was this notion that if I want to serve 12, I can serve 12, but I could also just serve 6 and not have to
Correct.
serve 8, or serve 9 and not have to serve 12. And so that's what I read into one of your answers, just to reiterate what I heard, but I don't know if there's other areas you're thinking about.
Well, but for the city council, the majority of the other boards and commissions and councils are 3 years, I believe. For consistency's sake. Yes. And so, I mean, I think that provides a layer of consistency for the volunteer coordinating committee, for Dawn as she's trying to figure out how to manipulate, all the requirements and things like that. And, it's easy math. I mean, it's easier to say 6 than it is 8, right? I mean, 8 years is a very, very daunting time frame for somebody that's coming into this brand new. 4 years can be very daunting. I mean, I think that we've seen a couple folks drop off. I know Councilor Duran and I have seen quite a few people just drop off midterm because they're like, this is nuts. Or life has happened or whatever, right? Commissioner Lopez, you had a specific thought on it. I think that maybe you might want to reiterate, yeah?
I think it was bouncing back off of that it is just flexibility. I was one of the ones that said that because it is, part of what I want to do as a Kaiser resident is serve Kaiser. The Planning Commission for me is a great start, it's amazing. I love it. I love it so far. But in 6 years, there might be another position, another board I can sit on. There's options, to have those options to be able to serve Kaiser in different places is something like personally it intrigues me, so I want to do that. And if I'm in a place in 6 years or 9 years, it's definitely sounds better than 8 or 12, right? Because I don't want to leave halfway through. That's not something, you plan for anyways. But just knowing that, okay, it's, these terms are more achievable. It's already in your mind. It matches everybody else. I think it just makes sense to me. I like it. But I like that extra term because of the consistency, or be able to have the more expertise and people that know what happened 9 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
And I just, and for Rhonda and for Tammy, I mean, I just want to say I'm very grateful for the neighborhood's inputs on this. And I don't think that my thought specifically on this is the antithesis of what you all were asking for, which is 3 3-year terms. I think it's actually, from my lens, it's that longevity and that opportunity because there is a layer of comfort. I've worked with Rhonda for, about a decade now on a variety of different issues. And, Tammy, you've been involved for the last probably 3 4 years. And, you've both seen different faces come and go up here. And there's a layer of credibility and authenticity that comes in those relationships. And being able to kind of harken back to some of those conversations, I think affords our neighborhoods and our committees and our groups in our neighborhoods the opportunity to reach in and have conversations with Commissioner King or Commissioner Witters or whomever, because that consistency is going to be there and there's that dedication from folks. But again, volunteer coordinating committee could say, you know what, nope, we don't want any more, bye. And that's gonna happen on a 3-year basis versus 4-year basis, which does offer the potential to refresh the blood a little bit more. And so I feel comfortable with the 4 3-year terms, just because the council made 12 an opportunity. Hey, math is math, right? A dozen is a dozen, no matter how many eggs you drop. Okay, so, I'm gonna recap and then somebody can put a motion. So for section 2-123 sub B, we are saying no more than one member shall be a non-resident of the city unless the member is a property owner or business owner in the city. Correct? No.
And what I'll actually do is change that unless to be an and.
Okay. Yeah, it's a qualifier then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's-
And then, sub C is the term of office of the appointed members shall be for 3-year. So for 3 years or until their successor, let's see, and 3 consecutive terms. So the first one will be 3, and then the last one will be 4.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Too many numbers in there. And then lastly, under section 2-124 sub C, no changes. All right, is there a motion to that effect? Commissioner Witters.
Clarification, aren't these in red in 124C? Those are changes that we're recommending, right?
Correct? Yes.
Yes, those were the sorry. Thank you, Commissioners. Yes, those were the recommended changes that we discussed at the last meeting in November that we took to council, that they didn't have any additional questions on. We left those in there just so you would see that those, while they were
got
not
one.
approved or adopted technically yet, those were not things that council needed more information on. It was just these 2 other items, and so this stuff up above was new.
And I
I just
think
wanted to clarify.
when I said no changes, I meant no changes to what's.
That's what I was.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you for allowing me to clarify. So I should say section 2-124 sub C as written.
Yeah, that's written there, yeah. Or no changes to the legislative changes.
Don't make it complicated. We're over here because of you anyways.
Bad news, sorry.
All right, is there a motion on those items?
I'll go ahead and make a motion, that section 2-123B be changed to read, no more than one member shall be a non-resident of the city and the member is a property owner or business owner in the city. That subsection C be changed, keep it as 3 years, and the last sentence be no appointed member shall serve more than 4 consecutive terms, so a total of 12 years. And that's subsection 2-124CB as written.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Let the newbie have it.
All right, a second by Commissioner King. Any discussion? The only thing I'll say on that, 12 is illustrative, and I say that only because if you do fill a partial term, we don't want to screw up the rotation, yeah? So the 4 consecutive terms is the term, I think the 12 is purely illustrative for purposes of getting to the 4 consecutive terms. Any disagreement on that? Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously with 1 absent, and I just want to say thank you again to Rhonda and Tammy for being here and providing your input on that. I hope we get it right. Okay, next item. Planning Commission rules.
Thank you, Chair Lawyer, Planning Commissioners. This is the second item that was part of what we dealt with in November. If you remember, we took there was, I think, 3 different resolutions. They got combined, they got updated to mirror kind of for public hearings, timing for Planning Commission and all that. So it was basically a big cleanup. And so because of the way that the rules are written that govern the planning commission, you pass a resolution for your rules, but you can't do that until the council approves it. So at the last, yep, it's awesome. At the last meeting, when we went to city council on the 16th, I believe it was, we brought this item as well as the previous changes that we just spent a great amount of time talking about. This resolution was approved by council, so it is now back before you as really, I'm sorry, it's kind of a goofy thing, but it's an exercise because now you need to go ahead and actually adopt this resolution. So it can now be adopted. So there's no changes to what our November meeting was or the recommendation. It really is just a matter of the legal process. So Joe's fault at the end of the day.
There's a separate resolution that says you guys will make your own rules with approval of the city council. And so that means you guys came up with the rules changes and then had to go be approved by the city council for you to then make them your rules. Yeah.
Government.
Commissioner Grants,
Are we looking for discussion or motion?
whatever you wish, sir.
I move the planning commission adopt resolution R 2025 dash blank in the matter of adopting rules of the commission and repeal of resolutions 83-1, 83-2, and R 98-2.
Is there a second on the motion?
Second.
Commissioner Hutchins?
Yeah.
All right, motion by Commissioner Granson, a second by Commissioner Hutchins. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? No? Sure? Okay, great. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously with one absent. Great job asking for permission, however that worked out. Beautiful. Okay, Planning Commission Work Plan, item 4C. This is great. I love reading this. Good job.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I want to just congratulate you guys. We just made up the time right there. That was amazing. That was like so perfect. Like, hey, look at this. This took a
we make
while.
a motion
This
to
was
reopen
awesome.
item
Nope, too late.
4B?
Okay, so I've got a brief staff report before y'all and a little, I guess it's a 2-page document that kind of represents our work plan in this next year. For those of you that have been on the commission for a while, this is something we kind of tend to always do the first meeting of the year. It is my Christmas and New Year's gift to you all. Just kidding. You know, it's one of those pieces where it's not a formally adopted work plan, so I'm not looking for a specific motion tonight. I really, though, am looking for an opportunity if y'all have certain things that you're like, hey, Shane, we want you to look at this, or there's anything to add. This is basically Dina and I's best guess on the things we're gonna be most likely dealing with. For some of you who've been here, some of these are pretty familiar because they've been on there a while, because they're ongoing things. Actually, one came up today, a text amendment that wasn't on our radar, that we found a little bit of a, that's awkward, we need to fix that. So like, as rules at state levels change, or definitions change, or sometimes definitions don't get changed when we thought they did 5 years ago, they show up and you go, oh, we have this question from a property owner, and that is a little bit of a problem. Those things get identified. So what I would love to do is just very briefly and 10,000 foot kind of view. We'll walk through the things that we've identified, give you opportunities if you have questions on them. I'm happy to answer them. And then if there are other things in your wheelhouses that you think, hey, what about this? What about this? We want to get that input so we can kind of update it. We kind of keep this list and kind of look at it from time to time throughout the year. And then awesome things like Pick'em come up that were never on our radar in the first place. And extra work, and there are some in this list that were not in last year's list at all, because.
Like when the city attorney is like, oh, hey, let's just fix all this stuff.
Yeah,
right? Okay.
yep, so all of those things. So, without further ado, you kind of have, I tried to categorize them like more by themes than specific items. So the first one, climate-friendly and equitable communities rules. That's been on our list for the last couple years. We all have heard about these. There's a bunch, there's a bunch of different things that we get to do with this and that we've been already doing with this, that you all have already been involved with to some level. So like the first one, we are going to be doing some text amendments to implement the requirements for our climate-friendly areas or the walkable mixed-use areas. You know, we've had a couple presentations at Planning Commission in the last couple years on this. First one we were designating, and then the Council of Governments was here this past summer, where after the study, we got identified, and, you know, that was kind of that area where we talked about, you know what, we're not going to move forward with the Cherry Center. So this first item is underway, but not complete yet. We did receive a little bit of an extension to our deadline on this one, which is kind of nice. And we are getting some additional support from the Council of Governments to do some, I'm not going to air quote it. I don't exactly know what anyway, there's some equity analysis work that needs to be done in conjunction with the adoption of the CFAs and the finalization of that. So that is, we've been having meetings with the COG back and forth. I haven't had one for a while. It was the holidays. But this one stays on the list because at some point, we will need to amend our code and the RCOD zone, and there'll be a comp plan text change that incorporates this and makes it real, right? Now, right now we have the study, we have these pieces. So that's kind of the first one. The second one is our regional scenario planning work that's been going on for a bit. This is one that actually Councilor Duran is on the advisory committee, and the mayor. Currently, there's who our advisory committee members are. We've had just the one, right? The one formal meeting in the open house. Yeah, so this is where we're doing a regional scenario plan. And this one's on the list, although I think my last bullet point in there, I'm not exactly sure what the role Planning Commission is going to have on this, but it will at least be a role of advisory to the nature of, hey, here's what we came up with. So it's basically running scenarios. The goal is to reduce greenhouse gases specifically emitted by light passenger vehicles. And we're looking at the whole region. So Marion County, the city of Salem, and Kaiser are all at the table. It'll be a plan for our entire region that ultimately the TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, will end up concurring with, and then it will go to each of the individual entities for actual adoption. And in this scenario plan will be some metrics, some performance measure kind of goals and targets that will help to inform the transportation system plan update and other planning things that we do. That's all I can say about it, and don't ask a lot of questions about it yet. But, no, I'm kidding.
It sounds super complex, but it could be as simple as adding sidewalks or designating bike lanes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is that, yes, I mean, that's what it's gonna be around, is those kinds of things on what ultimately do we want our transportation, what are our transportation and land use patterns gonna look like in our region based on the long range of how we're gonna meet the goals that have been outlined at the state level for reducing greenhouse gases. And so they essentially have done a bunch of, I like to call it black box.
The modeling?
Yes, the black box modeling. And so they've established a baseline and said, well, if we just keep going with what we've got adopted right now, here's where we're going to be. So what levers, they like to use the word levers, what levers need to be shifted in the areas of public transportation and multimodal transportation and more people bicycling and less people driving and so there's a bunch of things you can do. You can change where your housing is located. You can increase transit services. You can reduce roads, so it forces there to be less cars. So there's a lot of different options. So ultimately, the regional scenario plan, the hope is that we'll be able to come up with a scenario that will outline a set of strategies, if you will, that will be implemented probably differently in Marion County than in Kaiser than in Salem. But as a region, we will be able to demonstrate that we're meeting the target that's been placed on us at the state level for the 2050 numbers. And so I will be keeping you posted. I thought we were going to be having a meeting in mid-January, but I never did get a confirmation. Yeah, so I know I filled out a doodle poll a couple times. So anyway, that one's on the list because at some point, something is going to be coming to Planning Commission. I don't know that you'll have really an action, but there may be a desire to have you make some sort of a recommendation before council's considering that at a formal level for adoption down the road. So we'll keep you posted on that. So the next one on the list, it's been a while. We talked about parking reform, and we had a presentation for some of you. Not all of you were on the commission at the time. One of the things with the climate-friendly equitable communities rules, there was a big element of that was parking reform. And some of those are already in place based on OAR 660. I don't remember the last number. Dana, do you remember the last number? No, that's a different one. There's a bunch of numbers. But there's already a requirement that we can't require a certain amount of minimum parking in a huge portion of Kaiser due to the frequency of our transit service. This little bullet point goes beyond that in that many jurisdictions around the state of Oregon have already done it, where they've already kind of eliminated parking mandates altogether. That is what we are going to be doing. I've requested a few extensions of that time frame, kind of putting that out a little farther. My desire is to try to do it concurrently with our climate-friendly area adoptions because the climate-friendly areas have different specific rules that don't allow us to require parking in it. So I'd rather just do it all at once. From a practical, like my head is swimming with all the stuff we're doing with the CFAC. It's awesome. I get confused at what extension I have where, and sometimes I get in trouble. Might have happened right before Christmas. We were supposed to have this done by the end of this year, guys. I was for sure that we had an extension until the end of June. So I did get an extension. So we have until the end of June to get rid of parking requirements in the city of Kaiser. So probably in May, we'll be bringing that as a text amendment unless something changes. So that one I just want to put on your radar because people are going to love it. They're going to be super excited about it and happy. So it'll be awesome.
Now, Shane, to clarify, just because you eliminate the requirement does not mean you can't allow it.
Correct. And so like that's one of the pieces that we have a big parking section that we already can't require, but that I would say is a recommendation. So we're going to see what that ends up looking like for our parking reform, but I might have got a little bit of a hand slap from the state of Oregon because they're like, hey, I haven't seen this. It's supposed to be done by December 30th. And I was like, no, it's not. It's not supposed to be done until the end of June. He's like, nope, that's the other thing. I'm like, oh. So, but graciously, I was able to justify an extension. I might have asked for a longer one than they granted me, but we got a little bit of something. So the last one on here is walkable design standards. And you say to Shane, doesn't this sound like climate-friendly areas, Shane? And Shane would say, yes, it does, but it's a little different. So this is one, we actually received some grant funds, some technical assistance. I think Dina and I have met with them once on this, a kickoff meeting. Were you in the kickoff meeting with me? Yeah, we had a Zoom call with them. You sent them a bunch of stuff. Yeah, anyway, so this one kind of has just gotten underway. Essentially, we're going to have to change, and they've started doing a code audit for us and identifying areas where our code doesn't align with these new provisions in OAR 660-012-0330. So this will ultimately be some text amendments coming to you all. I am expecting us to probably have some sort of a presentation either from me or a consultant team. The calendar's always hard. I actually thought we might be able to hit this meeting, but there was just they weren't far enough along in their work, and I haven't seen anything yet to wrap my head around what is this really going to mean for us. The one thing I will say is that we've already done a lot of work through our River Cherry Overlay District, the revitalization plan, and frankly, a lot of our standards already are fairly in line with what is being required, but there will probably be some additional things that we don't currently require or that we'll have to tweak in order to demonstrate compliance with the OARs. So again, stay tuned, but I think that's going to be sooner than later. It might be like February, March, I'm not sure, but at least as an initial. So that's that one. And then we have a few, we've identified a few things with middle housing, which we heard some testimony from one of the neighborhood associations with concerns about middle housing already tonight. And middle housing is complicated and it can be confusing for folks. What we do know is the vast majority of all development proposals that we have been seeing in the last few years are for middle housing. That is what is happening. That's what's being built. And in that, as things have started getting built, certain things have been brought up that are like, maybe we need to consider this. So just like recently there was something with lighting, and we haven't had really lighting standards for standard residential development, which middle housing is standard residential development. But with middle housing and massing and different things, you kind of go, oh, this might be a little bit different. Where we have some standards in the commercial world and in the multifamily world, middle housing can't be captured for that. So Dean and I have just kind of started putting our heads together to figure out, yeah, we think we might need to adopt something that would apply citywide, all residences regardless, but that would help mitigate some of the concerns that we've got and just a couple of the projects we've had. Another one very specific is screening and buffering. When we have subdivisions, partitions, oftentimes there ends up being a requirement placed somehow that some fencing or screening and buffering is required around the perimeter of a subdivision. But technically, our code has never required it as an outright requirement unless it's dissimilar adjacent uses, so like commercial to residential or multifamily to residential. And with these new developments coming in that are predominantly, 100% being middle housing developments, we're getting a lot more concerns from neighbors. And so...
Can you make it like 100 feet wide?
Probably not, no. But so that's just like a few of the ones that we've kind of identified where we think we need to make some tweaks in our code. It's not specific to middle housing, because it can't be specific to middle housing. It would be to all housing. But the fact that we've seen middle housing starting to get developed and heard some of the concerns of citizens, we feel like it may be appropriate to look at that as a whole. So kind of want to put that on your radar. There was also some things with design standards generally in street-facing elevations. Generally, our design standards are stronger for what the front of a structure is, but you might have a bigger blank wall if it's a corner lot. We've been really successful with working with developers, and for the most part, builders and developers, they want to build something that looks nice. They want it to be quality, but we kind of feel like we probably need to maybe quantify some of those standards because we feel that they lack currently. There's some inconsistencies and some confusion with the assisted living references throughout the code and where something is versus a residential home on a smaller scale versus what becomes a social service or more of a medical type of thing. And we've had a few of those issues, which we've been able to navigate fine, but we're kind of looking at trying to tighten that up so it's a little more user-friendly for folks that are running those kinds of facilities. And then this one's actually been on our list I think it was on our list last year, and we really didn't tackle it, but the concept of transitional housing. There's some complexities around those types of housing types where maybe you're dealing with housing that's primarily serving people that are transitioning from homelessness into housing or addiction or things like that. And there's quite a few protections at the state and federal level for things like Oxford houses is a term that maybe you're familiar with, where maybe there's some unrelated individuals living together as a family unit. But at state and federal level, there's been a lot of definition changes around what we call a family or don't, and there's some out-of-date references in our code, frankly, that we haven't applied because really they don't comply with the Fair Housing Act. But there are communities that very specifically will regulate and define traditional housing types, and we don't currently do that. So we have some homes in Kaiser that operate in kind of a Oxford House-esque model. And it's ultimately been a kind of on a case-by-case having to look at, okay, can you fit? Do you fit? Do you not fit? And what's your operational standards? And are you providing treatment and training, or is it really just housing? And does it fall as a residential home, or does it fall as more of a commercial or medical type facility? So that one's been on my radar for a bit, and honestly we have some homes operating in Kaiser that have been able to fit into what our existing code allows, but they've had some challenges with obtaining some funding because it doesn't look super clean to the folks that they're trying to get funding through. So I had to do kind of some written determination stuff for them, and so we think it might be appropriate to try to define that a little bit better. So that's what that one is. Page 2, floodplain, Pick'em stuff. We talked about that just a little while ago. As we all know, or we all talked about, we are choosing to take the case-by-case approach. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed. But there is, we think, a need or a high probability. Joe and I have talked about it at some length. I just want to put it on your radar. We may need to make some changes to that in this upcoming year. We may not have to, but we're going to kind of take it as it comes and see what happens.
Have they settled the lawsuit though on that yet? That allows us to make a determination one way or another?
Hold on, what?
We're just talking about Pick'ems, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but wasn't there a lawsuit that effectively changed it so that even if you chose one of the other things?
Oh, yeah.
You still
Yeah.
had to go case by case? Is
Yeah.
that settled?
Yep,
Okay,
we have to go case by case. Well, yes. Yes, and, so,
Because that was the question mark, right?
Yep.
Was because there was pending litigation,
yeah,
regardless of what happened, you still defaulted to
Yes.
case by case.
yes.
So that case is complete, yes or no?
I'm not sure about
Okay.
the status of that case, but the result right now is,
It's still.
we're all living in that limbo of case by case.
Sure,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So
Which was the ultimate recommendation from this body, I think, in November.
Yes.
was We're just gonna do case by case, because,
right. The issue becomes, and what we talked about in November and what we've kind of discussed is right now, there is really nothing in the development code that indicates we're doing case by case even though we need to do case by case. And because of the way that FEMA applied the Pick'ems and just said, thou shalt do it, and they didn't go through a rulemaking process, there's not quite the protection that there would be. Like with parking, I have a protection. If a developer comes in and, doesn't want to do parking, and a neighbor says, oh, you have to require them to do parking because your parking section says they are required this many spaces, I can point to OAR 660-12-0435 or whatever, 440, I think it's 440. I think that one's 440. Anyway, I can point to that and go, well, this is a state law that essentially supersedes my local regulation. Because of the way FEMA did the Pick'ems, that doesn't technically exist, but we're still an NFIP community, and we've been told thou shalt, or you're in trouble. So all that to say, Joe and I have talked about it. I'm trying to hold off, but our hand might get forced to have to put something in the code to somehow connect it. And so that's kind of just in there. The next one is master plan applications. I think last year I told you, I was thinking we were going to have a master plan for Area C, because I thought we were. That just went away. But now I'm telling you, we might get a master plan for Area B. So we'll see. The other one that was on the list last year and still is on the list and still is a high probability is the piece of property on River Road, the Isle of A piece. That still is being talked about. I think the last time I had a meeting with the developer was, probably 4 or 5 months ago. I thought we might be having some meetings before the end of the year, so I know that they've been working, trying to figure things out there. I still think there's a likelihood we see a master plan at Planning Commission sometime this year. But we'll see what happens. Because obviously with those, and even with Area B, if we saw something, it'd probably be an amendment, but now Planning Commission is going to see amendments, whereas before we didn't. So I wanted to put those on the list. TSP update, Mr. Lawyer, you referenced that earlier. Yes, it will be a longer project. It's been on our radar forever. Some exciting news, the work is sort of underway. So I mean, it's not technically, but it sort of is in that we know we're in the queue. There was a mini RFP sent out by ODOT in the state that I haven't heard any results on yet, so I'm not sure where they're at with that. But I just got an email from, there's kind of two pieces. State of Oregon actually brought some money to the table because TSPs are extremely expensive to update. And again, in an area of engagement and equity analysis work, the state was able to bring some money to the table and was able to procure through an IGA. So it's not me paying it, but it's them hiring somebody to help us. And I just got a request for a kickoff meeting to have some discussions about it, which is awesome, except I don't actually know where we're at quite yet on the TSP itself. And it would seem weird to do an engagement and equity work on a project until it's actually happening. So there's like these two moving parts, along with the other 4 things that we're doing all around the same stuff. So it gets a little confusing for me. But the good news is it is happening. It's just a matter of time at this point. And so then there's also that other element we talked about earlier where the scenario planning and it kind of need to happen concurrently, but the one kind of needs to get done ahead of time and it's not quite done yet. Actually, it's not really close to done yet. So, yeah, we're going to have some meetings this next year at a bare minimum. And then that will ramp up as we get into that process of the TSP update. And then the last thing on the list is any other things that you all have that you think we need to add to our list. I do have those like 4 ongoing big things that we can talk about them if you guys want to, but that's really more just informational. There's a lot of words like UGB that got thrown around earlier today and yeah.
I do want to bring up, because I
Yeah.
promised Commissioner Burson that we would look at accessory structures again. Okay, now, that's just me. I know that, let's see, you were here for that, weren't you? Yeah. So Commissioner King was the only one that wasn't here for that, but, actually, were you? No, you weren't. But I did tell Ron, we would hopefully try to bring it back up. At the time, we weren't ready to move forward with that particular thing, so if there's consensus from Planning Commission, I told him I would bring it back up. I didn't tell him we would actually take the text amendment again, but I told him to bring it back up. So I don't know if anybody else feels super strongly about that, wasn't one way or another, but that was something that he felt pretty passionate about, because he wants a really, really great opportunity for people to have large garages. What's that?
Slightly larger.
Yeah. Well, because the variance took it like to 1,200 percentage or whatever, 1,200 square feet with the percentage or whatever it was a lot, so. That was just something that brought up. I mean, so we can take it or leave it. It doesn't really matter. I did tell him I'd bring it up, so. It's a good work plan, though. I mean, a lot of this is super complicated stuff, and it's all dependent on things that could or might or may happen. Or we might just have a really, a lot of good conversations about other things that aren't related to the what-ifs in the world. Any other thoughts or comments on the work plan? Yeah, last year was a busy year. Mr. Lindsay brought us some great opportunities to have conversations a couple times. Thank you for that. Now, you're not, let's see, April's a year, yeah?
No, January.
January? Well, yeah, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Really?
I'm a toddler.
Time flies when we're having fun.
Not quite yet.
It was great
more
great to see you and Shannon in that picture with the full code. That was pretty cool. All right, Commissioner Lopez, are you able to do the council update on the 21st?
I am.
Great. And I would say there's probably no prohibition if commissioners felt strongly to go and comment on this piece when it does come up to council, as it relates to the term limits and et cetera and so on.
Yeah, in fact, that would probably be welcome if, I think generally, I've seen the group nab somebody if there's a representative in the audience to say, hey, what were your guys' thoughts?
Yeah,
So,
as long as we don't meet a quorum. All right, any other, oh, I totally skipped you, Counselor Duran. I don't agree with that. I would like to formally congratulate you on the start of your second term, the second of potentially unlimited terms. Yeah, 4 years down, 4 more to go. What else you got going on, Counselor?
That's about it, other than we got to swear in a few other people for the, Lori Christopher came in and Marlene Parsons and the mayor got sworn in, so that's really the bulk of what happened on Monday night. Am I missing something? There was...
Council President Shaney Starr
yeah.
has another council presidency for this 2 years.
Forced her for another 2 years. Gave her the opportunity for council president. I think that's it. I didn't look back at what we did, but that was it.
Great. Well, congratulations. Welcome back. Hopefully you get to stay with us.
Do we need a motion to change order?
Shut up. You know what? Without any further ado, any other witty comments, statements, remarks? Yes, sir.
Just one other thing for planning commissioners. Like I said, the work plan is really just informational. We kind of do work as it comes, and how we prioritize just kind of depends on what the priority is. But I do invite, like, if you have other things that are like, oh, what about this? What about this? Please feel free to reach out to myself or to Dina. Let us know, put things on our radar. If we need to bring something up at a planning commission meeting, things like that. Always open door. Well, whatever. Yeah, we're open emails. Phone calls. So do feel like if, hey, what about this? And you want to add something, we can talk about that at a future meeting, because it really is just kind of a living document that we tweak and change as we need.
I think it goes without saying, 2024 was an interesting year. We had a variance that we held in my first ex parte hearing. It was quite interesting. You did bring forward complete change in the way that this body does work. And that was a lot of work on you all to bring that together. And, in and among all of that was all this fun stuff with, what's happening in the real world as it relates to external forces and how we're doing business. Oh, and then the city attorney is like, we're not done. Here's this other thing. So it was a lot of work. All the CFAC presentations, everything else. It's a lot. And you guys have adapted on the fly and done really, really good work. And I just want to say thank you for that. For those of us that were here all last year, it was a tremendous amount of work, a lot of patience, especially when we're like, no, we don't want that. And then we're like, nah, just kidding, we want it. And we brought it back. What I'm talking about specifically is the variances and some of the other things. And I just want to say thank you again to Commissioner Witters for being patient, because we kicked him off the opportunity to sit on the one and only ex parte conversation we had at the time. But, it was a good year. 2024 was a good year, did a lot of really great work, and you definitely deserve the kudos, because it was pretty big. So let's kind of just, yeah, right. All right, one comment. We got approval, the Gold Star Family Memorial Monument Group got approval by council and ultimately staff to eliminate the tree over at PFC Ryan J. Hill Memorial Park. If you don't know where that's at, go to Panera Red, turn right at the bridge, go across. It's a fountain. It's a desert fountain in that it doesn't actually spew water. And that's going to be going away. Ultimately, we're going to be putting a really great monument in there. So super grateful to be able to have that opportunity to kick off that project. We will be doing a groundbreaking ceremony, literally bringing sledgehammers to break up cinder blocks. So stay tuned for that. Keep your ear out to the ground. Anything else for the good of the order tonight? All right, we will be adjourned at 7:54 PM.